The summer of 1984 was alive with color and sound, a season suspended in golden light that seemed to stretch endlessly over the small town. The county fair had arrived, bringing with it the smell of spun sugar and sizzling corn dogs, the sweet perfume of fried dough mixing with the sticky tang of caramel apples. Neon signs buzzed softly in the warm evening air, flickering in rhythm with the laughter that spilled from the midway. Children ran past in a blur of bright t-shirts, ribbons in their hair catching the sun, while the carousel spun slowly, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, their eyes wide and joyful. The scent of popcorn, salty and comforting, mingled with the distant roar of the ferris wheel, a mechanical giant that turned lazily against the sky melting into shades of orange and violet. It was the kind of evening that seemed eternal, a moment you could imagine preserving in amber, a memory that would later ache with absence. Among the throng were three sisters, inseparable, their hands brushing together in fleeting touches that betrayed the closeness only siblings know. The eldest, 16, had a quiet poise, her eyes reflecting the lights of the carnival with a curiosity that always seemed to question everything she saw. The middle sister, 15, was restless, always tugging at the hems of her younger sister's dresses, dragging her into every booth and ride, her laughter loud and infectious, a sound that seemed to echo even over the music and chatter. The youngest, 13, had the wide-eyed wonder of someone experiencing the world as though it were made of magic itself, her small fingers clutching a half-spun cotton candy, her gaze shifting constantly from one flickering light to the next. Together, they moved through the carnival like a single organism, their energy luminous and uncontainable, drawing the attention of strangers without ever noticing it. They had been looking forward to this night for weeks. Tickets clutched in their pockets felt like keys to a world built entirely for them, a sanctuary from the ordinary rhythm of school and home. Each ride was a thrill, each game a challenge, each prize a tiny crown of victory. The older sister dared the younger ones onto the towering rides, screaming with delight as the wind whipped their hair, carrying their laughter across the fairgrounds. They stopped at booths to throw rings, to toss balls, to grab tiny trinkets that glittered under the carnival lights. Their joy was unguarded, pure, and unbroken, a perfect picture of adolescence's fleeting innocence. Parents watched from benches in nearby food stalls, smiles strained but warm, attempting to capture the evening in snapshots and Polaroid photographs. The flash of the camera froze moments in time, the three sisters posing with stuffed bears almost too large to carry, their faces radiant, oblivious to the shadow that would descend years later. Each photo captured more than an image, it captured the essence of their lives at that moment: laughter, freedom, sisterhood, and a world that felt vast but entirely safe. Yet, beneath the glow of lights and the harmony of summer sounds, there was an unspoken tension, almost imperceptible. The carnival had its own rhythm, and in the spaces between rides and laughter, strangers brushed past the sisters. Faces appeared and disappeared at the edges of vision, shadows passing under neon glow. These fleeting moments, unnoticed at the time, would later be examined with the obsessive scrutiny of grief, the way survivors searched desperately for signs and answers in fragments of the past. As dusk deepened into night, the carnival transformed. Lights became more brilliant against the darkening sky, casting long, trembling shadows across the asphalt. Music from the rides took on a more haunting cadence, each note winding into the warm evening like a memory being stitched into the air. The sisters' energy remained unbroken. They ran, they twirled, they shrieked with delight on the swings and spun themselves dizzy on the carousel. The youngest clutched the hand of her middle sister, trusting, unaware of how ephemeral this moment was. The older sister kept a careful watch, laughing but scanning, as if she sensed something unspoken, some tiny fissure in the perfection of their night. No one could have predicted that within hours, the carnival's vibrancy would be replaced with chaos and terror, that the echoes of laughter would be replaced with frantic searching and empty spaces. But in that golden hour, the world was alive, shimmering with possibility. The three sisters existed in that instant as 3 points of light in the dark, spinning together at the center of a universe that seemed infinite. Every ride, every candy stall, every flickering neon bulb would later be imbued with memory, longing, and the ache of absence. It was the kind of evening that seems eternal until it is gone. And on that summer night in 1984, beneath the carnival lights and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy, 3 lives shimmered with innocence, unknowing of the void that would follow. The image of the sisters, hands intertwined, faces glowing under the carnival lights, would be preserved forever in photographs in the hearts of those who loved them, a beacon of a moment lost but never forgotten. That night was beautiful, fragile, and haunting, a perfect calm before the storm of mystery that would unfold. The night air was thick with the scent of fried dough and the lingering sweetness of cotton candy, a familiar comfort that now seemed almost cruel in hindsight. The carnival's lights glowed against the darkness like a constellation fallen to earth, each neon sign casting colored reflections onto the asphalt. Music from the rides carried across the midway, a mixture of organ-like melodies and mechanical whirs, but beneath it all, there was the subtle hum of human expectation, the promise of joy, the thrill of the unknown. Among the crowd, the three sisters moved as they always had, laughing, chasing one another between booths, their skirts and hair catching the electric glow of carnival lights. But that evening, the ordinary chaos of crowds and rides was about to transform into something unrecognizable, something that would forever haunt every corner of the town. It began, as these things often do, without warning. A misstep in the throng, a brief separation, a parent distracted by a sudden call, small, innocuous moments that would ripple into a nightmare. The eldest sister had paused at the edge of the Ferris wheel, pointing out the tiny glimmer of the county lights stretching into the distance, while the middle sister was pulled toward a game booth by the ringing chime of a prize bell. The youngest, enchanted by a row of stuffed animals glowing under the fluorescent bulbs, lingered, her small fingers brushing the soft fur of a doll she longed to have. And then, in the span of minutes, the three had drifted apart in a way that would soon feel irreversible. At first, the separation was treated as a minor inconvenience, a typical carnival confusion. Parents called their names, voices straining over the music and chatter, scanning the crowd with anxious eyes. Booth owners and ride operators were asked if they had seen the girls, but their answers were vague, distracted by the constant influx of patrons. Friends and neighbors joined the search, their laughter replaced with urgent whispers, and the carnival, once a place of light and warmth, began to feel impossibly vast and labyrinthine. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the paths, and the neon glow became both guide and trickster, illuminating faces in the crowd but never revealing the truth. Panic began to set in. The parents' hearts thumped with an escalating rhythm, a staccato echo of dread that matched the lights flickering on the Ferris wheel above. One moment, they were calling the girls' names into the night, the next, they were running through the midway, questioning strangers, scanning each cluster of laughing children with desperation. The fairgrounds, with all their bright noise, seemed suddenly silent in the sense that the world itself had shifted, pulling away from the safety of familiarity. Even the smallest sounds, the creak of a ride, the metallic clatter of a game, took on a strange, ominous weight, each echo a reminder that the sisters were nowhere to be found. The carnival staff were notified, but in the confusion, their efforts were fragmented. Some remembered seeing the girls pass by, others recalled only fleeting glimpses of small figures darting between the crowds. There were conflicting stories, a shadowy man near the edge of the grounds, a suspicious van that appeared and vanished, a vendor who swore he saw the girls headed toward the parking lot but could not say for certain. Each lead, however small or contradictory, became a thread in a tangled web of uncertainty, one that the families would later trace obsessively in hopes of finding meaning where there was none. Police arrived, their presence a mixture of reassurance and procedural formality. They took statements, organized searches, and walked the pathways of the carnival with flashlights cutting arcs through the night. Officers questioned strangers, checked the perimeter, and tried to reconstruct the sisters' last movements, but the sheer size of the fair and the density of the crowd made the task almost impossible. Every witness seemed to offer fragments, snatches of clothing, brief glimpses, half-remembered interactions, but none could definitively explain where the three had gone or who might have taken them. The night, once filled with music and laughter, became a slow, aching suspense, each tick of the clock amplifying the terror of absence. As hours stretched into early morning, the fairgrounds emptied, leaving only security lights and the echo of rides long stopped. Parents scoured parking lots, booths, and empty alleys, calling names into the darkness that seemed to swallow their voices whole. Friends and neighbors formed search parties, moving methodically through the carnival grounds, their flashlights cutting through the shadows but revealing nothing. The adrenaline of the initial panic gave way to a deep, hollow dread. Every empty space became a potential hiding place, every shadow a threat. The carnival, once a place of joy and innocence, had transformed into a labyrinth of fear and unanswered questions. By sunrise, the grim reality began to settle in. The sisters were gone. The carnival was closed, rides idle, and the smell of fried food hung heavy in the air, a ghost of the night before. The parents were left clutching remnants of a normal evening, a lost hat, a small bracelet, a half-eaten candy apple, artifacts of an ordinary night now rendered unbearably poignant. The community began to awaken to the fact that this disappearance was not a temporary confusion, not a matter of wandering off, but something far darker and more permanent. Newspapers would later describe the scene as chaotic, but for those who lived it, it was a nightmare rendered in mundane details. The last glimpse of laughter, the empty booths, the glowing ferris wheel turning slowly in the dawn light. What followed were weeks and months of searches, of tips that led nowhere, of sightings that never panned out. The carnival had given them a night of joy, and then, in a way that seemed almost impossible, it had taken everything. Every moment leading up to the disappearance was replayed over and over by the families, friends, and investigators, tiny decisions, small separations, fleeting distractions, each dissected for meaning, each imbued with a sense of haunting inevitability. In retrospect, even the smallest details, the way the wind caught the banners, the angle of a shadow, the brief glance of a stranger, took on the weight of prophecy, a silent hint that something unimaginable had occurred. The night of the disappearance remained, and remains, frozen in memory. The carnival lights, the laughter, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy, all became spectral markers of a time when innocence was stolen, and certainty was replaced with absence. That single night in 1984 set in motion a mystery that would stretch across decades, leaving a void in the hearts of the family, the community, and eventually the strangers who would one day return to touch the edges of that lost moment. It was a night that began with joy and ended with silence, a delicate, devastating fracture in time that would never fully heal. The days after the carnival disappeared into a haze of disbelief and quiet horror. For the parents, each morning began not with the usual rituals of breakfast and school runs, but with the hollow ritual of checking empty rooms, calling names that went unanswered, and scanning the neighborhood with eyes trained for signs that no longer existed. Their home, once filled with the small, comforting sounds of daily life, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the washing machine, the murmur of conversation, now seemed unnaturally still. Each echo of silence was a reminder, sharp and jagged, that 3 lives had been ripped from the ordinary fabric of their existence. Friends and neighbors visited sporadically, offering food, comfort, and half-hearted reassurances, but soon even those visits became strained and awkward. The parents existed in a kind of suspended time, their grief both private and painfully public. Every interaction was tinged with the knowledge that nothing could restore what had been lost. Small details, an abandoned bike at the end of the driveway, a missing shoe, a school uniform folded neatly on a chair, were transformed into symbols of absence, each a silent testament to the void left behind. Sleep became fitful, interrupted by dreams in which the sisters returned only to vanish again, or in which the carnival itself transformed into an endless maze from which no one could escape. The siblings of the missing girls bore their own invisible wounds. They learned, almost overnight, that life continued for everyone else while theirs had been fractured. The mundane rhythms of school, of friends and play, felt impossible to maintain under the weight of loss. At night, the younger siblings would whisper questions into the darkness, their voices trembling with fear and longing. Where are they? Will they come home? Their parents could offer no answers, only the shaky promise that they were doing everything possible, even as they silently wrestled with the unbearable thought that they might never see their daughters again. Community support became a fragile lifeline. Posters were printed and stapled to telephone poles, grocery stores, and school walls, the sisters' faces frozen in mid-smile, eyes wide with the innocence of youth. Neighborhood watchers organized search parties that combed empty fields and nearby woods, combing for any trace, any clue. The town rallied around the family, yet even in the midst of this collective effort, the emotional strain was palpable. People wanted to help, but the answers were elusive, and the family's anguish was a constant, unyielding presence that shadowed every attempt at normalcy. Media coverage brought both hope and anguish. Television crews arrived, cameras capturing the tears and desperate pleas of the parents, and newspapers printed the sisters' faces in black and white, often juxtaposed with the words missing or vanished. The family's grief became a spectacle, their private agony displayed for public consumption. Friends and distant relatives watched from afar, offering words of sympathy that could not reach into the depth of the wound. The parents grappled with an uncomfortable duality, the desire to bring attention to their daughter's disappearance while also fearing that every public mention diluted the intimacy of their sorrow. Every day was punctuated by fleeting glimpses of hope and immediate despair. Sightings were reported, 3 girls seen near a bus station, or playing at a neighbor's house, but each lead ultimately unraveled. Witnesses' memories proved unreliable, or were revealed to be cases of mistaken identity. Phone calls came in from strangers claiming to have information, only to be dead ends, cruelly teasing the fragile hope that remained. The parents learned to navigate this impossible terrain, hope and disappointment intertwined in an endless cycle, leaving them emotionally exhausted and constantly vigilant. Time did little to soothe the pain. Weeks became months, months became years, and yet every anniversary of the carnival brought the same acute ache. The family would gather photos, sometimes holding the sisters' favorite toys or items of clothing, allowing the memories to flood back with an intensity that was both comforting and devastating. Birthdays passed without celebration, school milestones were unmarked, and holidays became exercises in endurance rather than joy. Each empty chair at the table was a reminder of the absence that had become permanent, a visual echo of the carnival night that had stolen 3 lives and replaced them with silence. The psychological toll manifested in subtle and devastating ways. The mother, once lively and expressive, began to withdraw into herself, her laughter rare and tinged with melancholy. The father, stoic yet trembling beneath the surface, poured himself into work, trying to occupy a mind that refused to rest. Siblings, now older, carried guilt and confusion, questioning whether they could have done something differently, or whether simple acts of attention might have prevented the disappearance. Grief intertwined with shame, fear, and longing, creating a complex emotional landscape that shaped every interaction, every thought, every memory. Friends and acquaintances, though well-meaning, often faltered in their attempts to console. Some offered clichés that landed like blows, others retreated entirely, unable to face the raw, unending pain. The family existed in a state of liminality, caught between past and present, between the memory of 3 vibrant girls and the cruel reality of their absence. Every new sound, every approaching stranger, every piece of mail was imbued with the possibility of news, good or devastating, making the simple act of daily life a tense and fragile experience. Yet, amidst the unbearable sorrow, small moments of resilience emerged. The family clung to rituals, however minor, that tethered them to the hope that their daughters might one day return. A photograph placed on the mantel, a chair left intentionally empty, a birthday cake with 3 candles lit in memory, these acts became symbols of endurance and love. In the midst of overwhelming grief, they refused to forget, refused to allow the sisters' lives to be erased entirely. Their pain was raw and relentless, but within it lay the undeniable thread of connection, a stubborn, fragile tether that bound the family to hope, to memory, and to the unspoken conviction that the story was not yet over. The morning after the carnival vanished into memory, the town awoke not to the usual sounds of summer but to a heavy, almost tangible tension. The disappearance of the 3 sisters had set the community on edge. Police cars patrolled streets that had once been quiet, officers stepping lightly across the dew-soaked lawns of neighbors and friends, flashlights cutting narrow beams through early fog. Every lead, no matter how small, was treated with urgency, yet every avenue seemed to twist and vanish before it could yield answers. The investigation began methodically, with maps spread across tables, notes scribbled frantically, and a growing sense that the carnival, with all its lights and crowds, had become an impenetrable labyrinth. Detectives first retraced the sisters' last known movements, speaking to ride operators, game booth attendants, and carnival staff. Each witness offered recollections colored by fleeting impressions, a shadow on the edge of the crowd, a stranger asking unusual questions, a child who ran past too quickly to be clearly remembered. Some remembered the girls stopping at certain stalls, others claimed they had seen them walking hand in hand near the Ferris wheel. Each fragment was treated as crucial, yet none provided clarity. The officers' notebooks filled with names, addresses, and half-formed theories, but the threads often led to nothing, unraveling as quickly as they were tied. Rumors began to spread almost immediately. A man who had been seen near the carnival was described differently by every witness, his age, height, and appearance shifting like a reflection in broken glass. Stories of a suspicious van prowling the parking lot circulated, though no evidence was ever found to substantiate them. Even carnival employees, usually well acquainted with every visitor, found it impossible to recall details with certainty. Memory became a fragile, unreliable tool in the hands of desperate investigators, a reminder that human perception was flawed, especially under the pressure of fear and adrenaline. Tips poured in from all directions, each promising a breakthrough. Neighbors called to report seeing figures in nearby woods, strangers reported children in faraway towns, and occasional notes arrived in the mailbox, some anonymous, some signed with cryptic initials. Yet, almost all of these leads dissolved under scrutiny. Some sightings were later identified as cases of mistaken identity, others proved to be deliberate fabrications. Every promising tip was a double-edged sword. It gave a flicker of hope before plunging the family and investigators back into frustration and despair. The emotional toll of chasing shadows became almost unbearable, especially for the parents, who clung to each rumor as if it might contain the long-sought truth. The media attention amplified the complexity of the investigation. Television crews arrived, cameras trained on Tear Street faces, printing photographs in newspapers and broadcasting the missing girls' images nationwide. Every detail was dissected, every statement examined in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. While this coverage kept the case alive in the collective consciousness, it also introduced noise, conflicting accounts, sensationalized reports, and unverified witnesses eager to appear on camera. The family had to navigate this treacherous landscape, balancing the need for public awareness with the need to protect the integrity of the search. Investigators also considered more practical lines of inquiry. They interviewed local residents, checked bus stations, train depots, and nearby highways, and even looked at neighboring towns. Every possible route of escape or abduction was analyzed. Could the girls have wandered off? Could someone from outside the community have targeted them? Each scenario was dissected with the cold logic of procedure, yet the warmth of human emotion never fully receded. Behind every hypothesis was the ache of parental love, the unrelenting anxiety of a town that had been forced to confront the fragility of innocence. As days turned into weeks, frustration mounted. Leads that seemed promising often evaporated, key witnesses offered inconsistent accounts, and the evidence was frustratingly sparse. Small details became magnified under the microscope of scrutiny: a torn ribbon from a carnival game, footprints leading nowhere, a partially eaten candy apple discarded on the ground. Each fragment held the weight of potential revelation, yet none delivered answers. For the parents, these dead ends were not just procedural obstacles. They were gut punches, reinforcing the cruel truth that the ordinary rules of life had been suspended the night their daughters disappeared. The psychological impact on the investigators mirrored that of the family. Detectives worked around the clock, tracing every tip, reviewing every report, yet each day ended with the same haunting emptiness. The case became a tangle of uncertainty, a puzzle missing pieces that might never be found. Officers expressed frustration, some quietly admitting to sleepless nights, haunted by the thought that they had failed the girls and their family. The relentless pursuit of answers, though driven by duty, could not erase the gnawing sense of helplessness that permeated every action. Yet, amidst the chaos, a strange, almost poetic tension took hold. The investigators, the parents, and the townspeople alike began to notice patterns that were never fully explained. A figure glimpsed at the carnival entrance, a ride that always seemed empty at certain hours, a mysterious note left anonymously on a neighbor's porch. Each minor detail became charged with potential significance. The line between fact and conjecture blurred, leaving everyone in a delicate state of vigilance, where even ordinary events could be interpreted as messages from the vanished girls themselves. Despite the failures and the endless frustrations, the early investigation laid the foundation for the decades-long mystery to follow. It documented the minutiae of that night, the noises, the faces, the fleeting glimpses, creating a record that would later be analyzed, reinterpreted, and revisited with new eyes and new theories. Every dead end, every conflicting report, every abandoned lead became part of a mosaic of absence, a reflection of both human fallibility and the profound emotional impact of loss. In the end, the early investigations were marked by a stark contrast. Methodical procedures clashed with emotional chaos, meticulous note-taking existed alongside desperate hope, and the community's desire for closure collided with the stubborn, impenetrable uncertainty of the world. The carnival night, with all its brilliance and laughter, had been transformed into an enduring enigma, one that would haunt the town for decades. Each unfulfilled lead, each unanswered question, served as a reminder that the sisters' absence was not merely a physical void but a profound emotional and psychological fracture, one that would ripple through every life it touched, shaping memories, fears, and hopes for generations to come. As the initial frenzy of the investigation waned, a different kind of storm began to gather, one that whispered through the streets, traveled across backyard fences, and echoed in the quiet corners of the town. The disappearance of the three sisters became more than a police case. It became a living story, reshaped and retold by every voice that encountered it. In diners, grocery stores, and barber shops, neighbors speculated in hushed tones, offering fragments of memory, fleeting impressions, and conjectures that grew wilder with each repetition. The carnival, once a symbol of light and joy, was transformed in collective imagination into a stage for unseen dangers, a place where innocence had been stolen in plain sight. Some whispered of strangers who had been lurking near the carnival that night, figures with no names, no faces that could be remembered clearly, yet somehow ever present in the mind's eye. Shadows in the photographs of the fair became ominous shapes, fleeting glimpses in the crowd were interpreted as signals of something sinister. Stories grew as they passed from person to person. A van parked suspiciously near the ride, a man watching the girls with too much interest, a fleeting figure disappearing into the trees at the edge of the fairgrounds. Each retelling added detail, infused with the teller's own fears and imagination, until the boundaries between fact and conjecture blurred completely. Conspiracy theories began to take root in the fertile soil of uncertainty. Some speculated that the girls had been taken deliberately, targeted by someone who had planned the abduction in advance. Others imagined more fantastic explanations: secret tunnels beneath the carnival, hidden rooms in neighboring buildings, or even mysterious strangers who existed only in the whispers of the town. Children were warned not to wander near the fairgrounds, and the adults found themselves scanning crowds with an intensity born of fear, replaying every small interaction in their minds as though it might reveal the unseen truth. The family, meanwhile, found themselves caught between the public narrative and their private grief. Friends and acquaintances brought them whispers of possible sightings, and strangers offered speculation as consolation. Some suggestions were cruel in their innocence, implying parental negligence. Others were more frightening, hinting at dangers the family had never considered. Each fragment, each theory, became a double-edged sword, a potential lead that could bring hope, but also a reminder that the answers were not easily found, if they existed at all. The emotional strain of navigating this landscape was nearly unbearable, a constant tug-of-war between longing and fear. Even within the family, conjecture became a private obsession. The parents combed over every photograph of the carnival, every newspaper clipping, every scrap of evidence with a magnifying intensity, trying to connect dots that may not have existed. Siblings whispered theories in the dark, imagining who might have taken the girls, or speculating wildly about where they might be. Dreams were invaded by scenarios born of the community's speculation: abductions, narrow escapes, secret hideaways, and upon waking, the line between imagined possibility and reality was often impossible to discern. Each rumor was both a beacon of hope and a blade of anguish, leaving the family perpetually off balance. The town itself became a crucible of memory and fear. Familiar streets and faces were now examined with suspicion. Every stranger passing through town drew wary glances. People remembered odd behaviors, fleeting interactions, and chance meetings from that fateful day with an almost obsessive intensity. The simplest events: someone standing too long at the edge of a field, a car parked unusually, a shadow passing a window, were magnified into signs of hidden truths. Everyday life took on a theatrical quality, where the ordinary was filtered through the lens of anxiety and loss. This climate of speculation also gave rise to storytellers, both cautious and reckless. Local newspapers printed letters to the editor theorizing on the fate of the girls. Radio hosts invited callers to share their impressions, memories, and hunches. Children's playground games mimicked the events of the carnival, their innocent imaginings shaded by the adult whispers around them. And though many of these theories were eventually proven baseless, they shaped the emotional landscape of the town in a way that fact alone could not. The disappearance had become a myth, one woven from fear, longing, and the deep human need for answers. Psychologically, this period was devastating for the family. Each new theory, each whispered speculation, carved into the psyche like a slow-acting wound. Hope and despair coexisted in a delicate, painful balance. The parents found themselves both drawn to and repelled by the community's chatter. They wanted leads, explanations, any insight that might restore their daughters to them, yet every rumor also carried the risk of deepening the emotional scar. It was a world in which uncertainty became a living, breathing force, infiltrating thoughts, conversations, and dreams. Despite the fear and confusion, a strange sense of vigilance took hold in the town. Families became hyper-aware of their children, neighbors kept watch over one another, and small acts of kindness were tinged with an almost ritualized sense of protection. The community, bound by shared grief and shared anxiety, moved together in an unspoken pact to prevent further tragedy. And yet, the mystery of the three sisters' disappearance remained unsolved, hovering like a shadow over every street, every home, every conversation, its presence felt as keenly as a winter chill. Over time, the theories became part of the town's identity, a narrative thread woven into the collective consciousness. Even decades later, people would recount stories from that night, embellishing or remembering differently, but always haunted by the same questions: who took the girls, why, and could they have been saved? The whispers persisted, growing softer with age but never disappearing, a testament to the enduring power of loss and the human need to make sense of the incomprehensible. The carnival, once a symbol of joy, became a focal point of collective memory, a stage upon which fear, hope, and imagination played out in equal measure. And so, in those small-town whispers, the mystery grew, not just as a case to be solved, but as an emotional, psychological force. It shaped the town, shaped the family, and shaped the memory of three sisters who vanished one night, leaving behind echoes of laughter, streaks of neon light, and the persistent, haunting question of what really happened under the carnival sky. Time moved forward in a distorted way, measured not by ordinary events but by the invisible weight of absence. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and the initial panic that had gripped the town transformed into a slow, relentless ache. For the family of the three missing sisters, life without answers was a suspended reality, a liminal space where the ordinary rules of living no longer applied. Each morning was a careful negotiation between hope and despair, the hope that perhaps today some small clue would emerge, and the despair that the world could not, provide the answers they so desperately needed. Every corner of the home became a touchstone for memory. The faint scent of the youngest sister's perfume still lingered on her bedroom curtains, a ghostly reminder of a presence that no longer walked the floors. Clothes left folded in drawers carried a weight far beyond their material form. Each item was a marker of a life interrupted. The mother would often pause in the hallway, her gaze lingering on the empty rooms as though trying to will them back into being. Even the smallest objects, a half-used notebook, a forgotten toy, triggered waves of longing, each one a subtle but persistent reminder of what had been lost. Outside the home, the world moved on without pause, indifferent to the family's suffering. Holidays were especially cruel. Birthdays came and went, celebrated in miniature with candles blown out in memory rather than joy. Christmas mornings were filled with the quiet clatter of opening gifts, the absence of laughter where it should have been loudest. Friends tried to fill the void, offering kindness that often fell short, their words insufficient against the weight of years lived in limbo. The family learned to navigate a life punctuated by reminders, both subtle and glaring, of what had been stolen from them on that summer night at the carnival. School years passed for the siblings who remained, each milestone underscored by the empty spaces left by their missing sisters. Graduation ceremonies, sporting events, and proms carried a bittersweet note. Achievements were celebrated, but always shadowed by absence. Teachers, classmates, and neighbors could not fully understand the quiet, persistent grief that accompanied the family, nor could they appreciate the ways in which life's ordinary rhythms had been forever altered. The missing sisters became omnipresent in memory, a lens through which every future event was filtered, every joy tempered by the ache of what might have been. Community life, too, adjusted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The carnival grounds became a forbidden zone in the town's consciousness, a place whispered about rather than visited. Conversations avoided the night of the disappearance unless unavoidable, as if speaking the names of the girls aloud might somehow disturb the fragile balance of memory and grief. Parents watched their own children with hypervigilance, the fear of loss ingrained into daily routines. Even casual interactions were colored by the underlying tension of an unresolved mystery, a silent acknowledgement that innocence could be stolen in the blink of an eye. Letters, phone calls, and occasional tips continued to arrive, but they offered little beyond temporary hope and eventual disappointment. Anonymous notes hinted at sightings, strangers claimed to remember the girls, and distant towns reported children matching their descriptions. Each communication was treated with a cautious optimism, but more often than not, these fragments dissolved into dead ends, leaving the family suspended in a state of expectation and despair. The emotional toll of repeated hope and inevitable disappointment became a central part of daily life, a rhythm as unyielding as it was exhausting. Psychologically, the family learned to adapt to an existence defined by uncertainty. Parents developed routines that balanced vigilance with the necessity of continuing life for the sake of survival. Siblings of the missing girls carried silent burdens, internalizing guilt or imagining what they might have done differently, replaying that single night in their minds over and over. Sleep, when it came, was interrupted by dreams that blurred reality and memory. The sisters appeared, laughing, chasing each other between carnival rides, only to vanish again, leaving a lingering emptiness that clung to the waking hours. Yet even in this suspended state, small moments of resilience appeared. The family maintained rituals that honored memory and connection. Birthdays observed quietly with candles lit in honor of the missing girls, photographs displayed prominently on mantels, and toys kept intact, untouched, as if the very act of preservation could bridge the gap between past and present. These acts, though subtle, carried immense emotional weight. They were gestures of hope, affirmations that the missing sisters' lives, though interrupted, were not forgotten, and that love endured in the face of uncertainty. The town, too, was affected by the long shadow of absence. Families became more protective, neighbors more attentive. Even decades later, stories of the three sisters circulated, their names uttered in careful, reverent tones. The carnival itself faded from active memory but remained a symbolic locus of loss, a place where innocence had been disrupted, and the normal rules of life suspended. Every year, anniversaries of the disappearance brought a renewed wave of reflection, grief, and community solidarity, a reminder that time had not healed all wounds, but had deepened them, embedding them into the collective consciousness. The longer the mystery remained unsolved, the more it shaped the emotional and psychological landscape of the family. Ordinary joys were permanently tinged with the color of absence. Ordinary frustrations were amplified by the lingering question of what might have been. Yet amidst the sorrow, there was also a quiet strength, a determination to keep memory alive, to continue living despite the void, and to nurture the fragile hope that one day, some piece of the puzzle might return, however small, to illuminate the truth. Life without answers became both a prison and a form of resilience. The family endured, navigating the delicate balance between despair and hope, between mourning and remembrance. Every day was a negotiation with absence, and yet, within that negotiation, the love for the missing sisters remained undiminished, unwavering, and eternal, a silent, luminous thread running through the years, tying together past, present, and the fragile promise of the future. It had been 39 years since the carnival night that had stolen the three sisters from the world of the living. Decades had passed in a blur of anniversaries marked quietly, birthdays remembered in candlelight, and the slow, persistent ache of unanswered questions. The family had long settled into a life defined by absence, where memory was both a refuge and a wound. And then, one ordinary morning, a quiet disruption arrived, a visitor, or perhaps a messenger, whose presence carried with it a tremor of the impossible. The stranger appeared without announcement. There was no warning, no dramatic entrance, only the simple act of leaving a package on the front porch. The box was unremarkable at first glance, small, nondescript, its cardboard edges softened by years of handling. But the parents recognized immediately, with a mix of incredulity and unease, the weight of significance it carried. Within that box were objects once belonging to the daughters, objects thought lost forever. Toys, carefully preserved, small artifacts of childhood, returned after nearly 4 decades of silence. The sight of them was surreal, as if time itself had bent to offer a fragment of reconciliation between past and present. The mother's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay the familiar shapes and colors of childhood, a stuffed rabbit with fur matted yet intact, a worn doll whose dress had faded, a small plastic horse with chipped paint. Each object carried the scent of memory, faint but unmistakable, a faint whiff of cotton and warmth, the invisible echo of laughter long silenced. She ran her fingers across them, feeling the textures, the contours, the imperfection of age, and was immediately transported back to that summer evening so many years ago. The toys were ordinary, yet extraordinary, mundane, yet imbued with a presence that seemed alive. The father stood behind her, silent, his eyes fixed on the small pieces of the past now returned. There was disbelief etched into every line of his face, mingled with the fragile stirrings of hope. Was it possible that someone had been holding onto these objects all these years? Could this stranger know more than they were revealing? Or was this a gesture of simple compassion, a quiet acknowledgement of loss, meant to bridge decades of silence without explanation? Each possibility tugged at the mind, impossible to reconcile, yet impossible to ignore. Neighbors soon noticed the arrival of the package. Whispers spread quickly, the toys had returned. Local reporters, long familiar with the story, were contacted, eager to capture a moment that blurred the lines between past tragedy and present mystery. But the family, protective of their fragile emotional landscape, declined immediate commentary. This was a private, intimate reconnect with memory, one that could not yet be shared with the world. The moment belonged first and foremost to them, a slow, delicate unfolding of emotion that had waited decades to be realized. Each toy was examined carefully, almost reverently. Small details emerged, scratches, handwriting, faded marks, that hinted at journeys undertaken without witnesses. The stuffed rabbit bore a stitch along its ear, a careful repair suggesting deliberate care. The doll's eyes seemed to have been polished over time, as if someone had been mindful of preserving a semblance of life. These signs were subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, yet they carried immense emotional weight for the parents. They were reminders that the daughters had existed, had mattered, and that someone, somewhere, had remembered them too. The return of these objects sparked an internal turbulence within the family. The parents oscillated between grief and hope, between the ache of what had been lost and the fragile possibility of connection. Memories long suppressed surged forward, moments of laughter, small quarrels, whispered secrets, bedtime stories, all intertwined with the tangible evidence now in their hands. The passage of nearly 4 decades had not diminished the emotional intensity of these memories. If anything, the years had sharpened them, each recollection carrying the weight of both time and longing. Questions naturally followed. Who was this stranger? Why had the toys been returned after so long? Was there a message hidden in the smallest details, a clue to the girl's fate, or was this act of quiet compassion meant solely as a gift to heal a fragment of the past? Investigators were contacted to document the discovery, to assess any possible leads, but even the police were cautious. This was not merely a case of evidence or crime, it was an emotional event that defied the normal protocols of investigation. Every photograph, every report, every description of the items became infused with a sense of reverence, the gravity of decades of absence now condensed into a single, tangible moment. As the days passed, the family lingered over the objects, reconstructing memories, imagining voices, revisiting conversations long silent. Even the simplest acts, holding the worn horse, setting the doll beside the rabbit, became rituals of remembrance. Each gesture was a way of bridging the impossible gap between past and present, between absence and presence. The toys were not merely objects, they were vessels of memory, anchors in a sea of uncertainty, offering a faint but undeniable thread of connection across time. The stranger, however, remained an enigma. No explanation was offered, no message beyond the act of return. This ambiguity was both comforting and unsettling. The family could choose to accept the gesture as an unspoken gift, a bridge across the decades, or they could see it as a tantalizing clue, a puzzle piece that might unlock long-hidden truths. In either case, the emotional impact was undeniable. For the first time in nearly 40 years, the sister's presence was tangible, palpable, and profoundly affecting. And so, in the quiet of the family home, amidst the soft hum of everyday life, the ordinary objects returned after decades became extraordinary. They carried memory, grief, love, and the lingering question of what had truly happened on that long-ago night. The act of return was both a closure and a reopening, a delicate intersection of hope and uncertainty, a reminder that even after decades of silence, the echoes of the past could still reverberate in ways both intimate and astonishing. The toys, returned after nearly 4 decades, were more than mere possessions. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed like relics of an ordinary childhood, objects worn down by time and use. But for the family, and for investigators who revisited the case with renewed intensity, these small artifacts carried a resonance far beyond their material form. They were potential witnesses, silent companions of the 3 sisters who had vanished into the carnival night. Each scratch, each stitch, each faded mark held the possibility of speaking truths that memory and rumor had long obscured. The stuffed rabbit was the first object examined closely. Its once white fur had yellowed with age, but its form was still intact, surprisingly well preserved for something that should have deteriorated long ago. One of its ears bore a small hand-sewn repair, delicate stitches that the mother recognized as her own handiwork from years before the disappearance. The sight of her own stitching, a mother's touch preserved across decades, brought tears to her eyes. Yet there was something strange about the way the thread had aged differently from the fabric. Some stitches looked fresher, as though someone had repaired the toy again much later, long after the girls had vanished. That single detail sent a chill through the room. It suggested the toy had not been abandoned in some forgotten place, but rather tended to, cared for, by unseen hands. Next came the doll. Her plastic face bore scratches that seemed accidental, but the wear on her dress told a subtler story. The fabric was faded unevenly, as if it had been exposed to sunlight on one side for years, and then tucked away again. More unsettling still was the discovery of faint writing, initials barely visible, scrawled on the inside of the doll's dress hem. The handwriting looked like that of a child. Was it one of the sisters who had marked it, claiming ownership in a way children often do? Or was it someone else, an outsider who had handled the toy long after it had left the girl's possession? The possibility that the doll had passed through unknown hands raised an unnerving thought. The sisters' belongings had lived a hidden life parallel to the family's grief, preserved intentionally, perhaps even ritualistically. The plastic horse seemed, at first, the least remarkable of the 3. Its paint was chipped, its menere worn smooth. Yet as the father examined it under a strong light, he noticed something peculiar, faint grooves etched into the underside of its belly. They were not factory markings but hand-carved, almost like someone had scratched letters or symbols with a sharp object. The markings were shallow, uneven, and difficult to decipher, but they were undeniably human-made. Investigators, when later consulted, speculated that the etchings might have been an attempt at initials, or perhaps even a date. Whether accidental doodles of a restless child or a cryptic signature left by someone who had possessed the toy later, the marks carried a haunting ambiguity. Together, the toys seemed to tell a fragmented story. They had not been discarded or forgotten in some distant landfill. They had been preserved, intentionally, in conditions that allowed them to survive nearly 40 years. Someone had kept them, cared for them, perhaps even cherished them. This raised as many questions as it answered. Who had guarded these relics of childhood for so long? Why choose now to return them? And what did it mean that they bore marks of human touch long after the sisters had disappeared? For the family, the artifacts reopened old wounds even as they stirred new hope. Holding the rabbit, the mother remembered tucking it into her youngest daughter's bed on the night of the carnival, smoothing its ears before turning off the light. The doll brought back afternoons of play, her middle daughter carrying it everywhere, refusing to let it out of sight. The horse belonged to the eldest, who loved to line it up with her collection of small animals, creating little worlds of imagination on the living room carpet. Each toy was inseparable from memory, a direct line to the voices, laughter, and presence of the girls. Yet the strange signs of preservation and alteration complicated those memories, making them feel both more intimate and more alien. Investigators studied the objects with a mixture of forensic detachment and emotional reverence. Forensic experts attempted to lift fingerprints, but after so many years, nothing viable could be preserved. The fabric was tested for fibers, the plastic scanned for residue, but the physical evidence was inconclusive. Still, the psychological evidence was undeniable. These were not random objects. They were curated, protected, and returned with intention. Someone, somewhere, had lived with these toys, carried them through the decades, and then chosen to release them back into the world of the family they had once belonged to. The community, too, read into the artifacts with their own interpretations. Some whispered that the toys were a message from the girls themselves, a sign from beyond that they were still present in some unseen way. Others believed the stranger who returned them was linked directly to the disappearance, perhaps a perpetrator, perhaps a witness, perhaps someone who had carried guilt for nearly 40 years. In church sermons, the toys were invoked as symbols of innocence preserved, fragile but enduring. At coffee shops, theories multiplied. Maybe the toys had been kept as trophies, or as tokens of regret, or even as clues meant to reignite the search. For the family, every possibility carried both hope and torment. The toys had spoken, in their own silent way, reminding everyone of what had been lost, what had been preserved, and what remained unknown. They were no longer just objects, they had become a language of their own, fragile fragments of a story waiting to be pieced together. And though they did not provide the final answers, they shifted the air, reshaping the mystery, suggesting that the past was not entirely lost, and that someone, somewhere, still carried the weight of three sisters whose laughter had once filled the air of a summer carnival. Memory has a way of refusing to stay buried. Even when decades pass, when the body ages and the world changes, certain moments remain sharp, jagged, impossible to smooth over. For the family of the three missing sisters, memory was not a distant country they could visit at will, it was a constant haunting, woven into the fabric of every day. And with the return of the toys, guilt, long dormant but never dead, rose to the surface like an old wound reopening. The parents carried the heaviest burden. They had told themselves for years that they had done all they could, that the disappearance was not their fault. Yet in the dark hours of the night, blame whispered into their minds like an insistent voice. The father replayed the decision to allow the girls to walk around the carnival on their own, reasoning it was safe, reasoning they were old enough. The mother tormented herself over the fact that she had looked away for only a moment, distracted by neighbors, before realizing the girls were gone. These moments, when revisited through the lens of hindsight, grew monstrous, larger than life, and every what-if became another blade twisting into the heart. Siblings, too, were not immune to the haunting of memory. The surviving brother, only a boy when his sisters disappeared, grew into adulthood carrying an invisible weight. As a child, he had wanted to stay behind at the ring toss game while his sisters went on ahead. For years, he believed that had he gone with them, he might have changed something, that his presence might have been enough to prevent the unthinkable. It was an irrational thought, but guilt does not obey logic. It sinks its teeth into the smallest cracks of memory and refuses to let go. His adult life was marked by this shadow, shaping his relationships, his choices, even the way he looked at his own children. The return of the toys stirred these old wounds with brutal clarity. Holding them brought not only the sweetness of memory but the sting of guilt. The mother wept as she pressed the stuffed rabbit to her chest, remembering how her youngest had begged her not to wash it, how she had relented, laughing at her daughter's stubbornness. Now she wondered if such moments of indulgence, of love, were enough to balance the weight of what had followed. The father, turning the plastic horse over in his hands, thought of how often he had promised to buy more figures to complete the set, promises left unfulfilled in the rush of adult responsibilities. Every small regret became magnified by the silence of the present. But guilt did not stop with the family. The community itself bore a kind of collective remorse. Neighbors recalled how quickly they had turned to speculation in the aftermath, how easily suspicion fell on strangers, or even on the family themselves, when answers did not arrive. Friends who had once joined the search remembered the day they gave up, returning to their lives while the parents continued to live inside the hollow echo of the tragedy. The haunting of memory was not confined to one household. It spread across the town, etched into its streets and spoken of in whispers, a reminder of what had not been done, of the vigilance that might have changed the story. Even those who had no direct connection to the sisters found themselves unsettled by the return of the toys. A retired police officer confessed that he still dreamed of the case, replaying decisions made during the investigation, leads not followed hard enough, witnesses not pressed for more detail, evidence handled with less care than hindsight demanded. He had told himself for years that the case had been impossible, that nothing more could have been done. But the artifacts, preserved, cared for, suggested otherwise. They hinted that someone, somewhere, had always known more than they had admitted. And with that suggestion came the sharp sting of failure. Guilt became a ghost that walked alongside memory, shaping the way each person recalled the night of the carnival. Memories were never static. They shifted, blurred, and rearranged themselves under the pressure of years and regret. Some claimed to remember new details when the toys reappeared, a stranger's eyes lingering too long, a car parked near the exit, a sound in the distance that had once seemed trivial. Whether true recollections or inventions born of guilt, these fragments added to the haunting tapestry of the story, pulling everyone deeper into its psychological grip. For the family, guilt was both corrosive and strangely sustaining. It hurt to remember, but to forget felt like betrayal. To blame themselves was a form of holding on, a refusal to let go of the daughter's presence, however painful the method. The toys, in this sense, became physical embodiments of both love and guilt, objects that carried not just memory, but the weight of responsibility, real or imagined. Each time they were touched, they reminded the family of their own perceived failures, yet also reaffirmed the bond that no disappearance, no passage of time, could erase. The haunting of memory and guilt was not loud or dramatic, it was quiet, persistent, like the ticking of a clock in a room where no one speaks. It lived in glances toward empty chairs, in the way the parents paused before turning off lights in unused rooms, in the silence that fell when laughter should have risen. And though guilt was cruel, it was also a strange testament to love. Only those who loved deeply could blame themselves so completely, could feel haunted not just by what was taken, but by what they believed they should have done to protect it. In this way, memory and guilt intertwined, inseparable threads in the fabric of the family's life. They did not provide answers, nor did they bring peace. But they ensured that the sisters were never forgotten, that their presence endured not only in photographs and stories, but in the very way their absence reshaped the hearts of those left behind. The haunting, in the end, was the clearest proof that love had not died, that memory, no matter how painful, was its most faithful shadow. Closure is a word people like to believe in. It offers the promise of neat endings, of wounds sealed shut, of the possibility that grief might someday loosen its grip. But for the family of the three sisters, closure was never a door that could be locked behind them. It was a mirage shimmering just beyond reach, an illusion that comforted others far more than it ever comforted them. When the toys reappeared, the word closure echoed once more. Reporters used it. Strangers whispered it. Even neighbors who had long avoided the subject now leaned across fences, suggesting perhaps the family could finally find peace. Yet to the parents, to the brother who had lived beneath the shadow of absence, peace was not what the toys offered. The rabbit, the doll, the plastic horse, they were not endings. They were reminders that the story had never ended at all. The father, in particular, resisted the language of closure. Sitting at the kitchen table, he would trace the faded cracks in the plastic horse and mutter that closure belonged to people who had answers. Closure, he said once to a friend, is knowing where they are. Closure is truth, not silence wrapped in mystery. For him, the toys only deepened the chasm of uncertainty. Someone had kept them safe, had preserved them in careful condition. Which meant someone had chosen, deliberately, to return them now. Why? To taunt? To console? To reopen a wound that had never healed? In the absence of clarity, there could be no closure, only questions multiplying in the shadows. The mother, quieter but equally resolute, found herself caught between longing and despair. Holding the rabbit to her chest, she admitted that part of her did not want closure, not in the way the world defined it. To her, closure meant acknowledging that her daughters were truly gone, that hope had no place left to hide. And though decades had passed, hope still clung to her like a fragile flame. It flickered every time the phone rang, every time an unfamiliar face passed on the street. She confessed that hope was cruel, but it was also the only thread connecting her to the possibility of reunion. To accept closure was, in her eyes, to betray the girls, to stop waiting. The brother's relationship with closure was different still. He was old enough now to have children of his own, to understand the raw terror of loss in ways his younger self never could. Watching his children laugh at a carnival one summer, he felt both joy and despair, joy in their innocence, despair in the reminder of his sister's stolen youth. The return of the toys unsettled him more than he admitted. In them, he saw evidence that his sisters had not simply vanished into thin air. Someone had handled those objects, cared for them, perhaps even cherished them. This suggested a hidden narrative, an untold truth. For him, closure was not about peace, it was about knowledge. Yet knowledge remained withheld, dangling like a cruel riddle. Outside the family, the idea of closure functioned more as performance. The community spoke of it in hushed tones, as though by naming it, they could cleanse themselves of lingering guilt. The carnival grounds, now overgrown and abandoned, became a site of uneasy pilgrimage. Teenagers dared each other to sneak through the rusted gates at night, speaking of ghosts and curses. Older residents left flowers or ribbons, gestures that suggested healing but also revealed their unease. They wanted the story to end, to fold itself neatly into the past. Yet the returned toys refused that ending. They resurrected the uncertainty, ensured that the mystery remained alive. Even law enforcement, when pressed, clung to the word closure as a shield. Officials spoke carefully of the emotional resolution the family might feel from having these artifacts back. Yet privately, some admitted that the toys were a knife twisted into the investigation's legacy. They implied that evidence had slipped past, that someone had been close enough to touch the truth all along. If closure meant competence, then the toys were proof that closure had never been possible. The notion of closure, in this way, became a kind of societal mask, something projected onto the family, onto the story, to comfort outsiders rather than those most deeply wounded. Strangers wanted resolution, a satisfying last chapter to a haunting tale. But real life is not a neatly written novel. The family knew this. Their days unfolded in quiet rituals, setting the table for fewer people than they wished, leaving lights on in case someone might return, tracing the names in yearbooks and faded photographs. These rituals were not closure. They were survival. And yet, even as they resisted closure, there was a shift. The toys, returned after so many decades, became symbols of continuity. They were proof that the sisters had lived, laughed, played, that they had once belonged wholly to this family. For all the pain they stirred, they also reconnected the family to a kind of tenderness that grief had nearly erased. They remembered the way the youngest would fall asleep clutching her rabbit, the way the middle sister staged elaborate dramas with her doll, the way the eldest lined her horse figures like sentinels on the windowsill. These memories, sharpened by the artifacts, were painful, but they were also gifts. Perhaps closure was never the right word. Perhaps what existed was endurance, the ability to hold love and grief in the same fragile breath. The family understood now that they might never know the full story, that truth might remain hidden forever. But the toys, in their silent, enigmatic return, ensured that forgetting was impossible. They made the sisters real again, not as victims frozen in time, but as children whose laughter once filled the night air. So, the illusion of closure lingered on the lips of outsiders, but within the family's home, there was only memory, only grief reshaped into ritual, only love refusing to die. Closure was not the destination. The haunting, the endurance, the refusal to let go, that was the true ending, if ending was even the right word at all. The story should have ended with the return of the toys, but endings are rarely so obedient. In truth, what lingered most was not the objects themselves but the presence of the unseen figure who had carried them back into the light. Whoever the stranger was, they had left behind no name, no face, only the silence of their shadow. And sometimes, shadows are more haunting than answers. The family tried to imagine this person, tried to conjure their features in dreams and in waking thoughts. The mother pictured someone older now, perhaps stooped with age, hands shaking as they placed the box carefully on the doorstep. She wondered if it had been kindness, some final act of mercy, to return what had been kept hidden for so long. The father resisted such tender visions. In his mind, the stranger was cruel, smug, feeding on the power of mystery, dragging the family back into torment with a gesture that looked like generosity but reeked of control. The brother, torn between both visions, wondered if the truth was even stranger, that the person who returned the toys had not been the one who took his sisters, but someone who stumbled upon the artifacts years later and carried them home without realizing the depth of the wound they would reopen. The ambiguity became its own ghost, a figure glimpsed in the corner of every reflection. The family could not walk through the grocery store without scanning unfamiliar faces, searching for a flicker of recognition in the eyes of strangers. Neighbors, too, grew restless. Whispers circulated about who it might have been. An old man living on the outskirts of town was seen burning boxes in his yard not long after the toys were returned. Was it him? A former carnival worker, long gone but rumored to have drifted back into the area, was it his doing? The absence of proof allowed suspicion to seep into every crack of the community's trust. The police, despite renewed interest, could do little. Forensics found no clear prints, no traceable DNA. The box itself had been ordinary, purchased from a local store chain available across half the country. Surveillance cameras on nearby streets had long since overwritten their footage by the time the discovery was reported. All that remained was the gesture, the act itself, as if the stranger had slipped in and out of reality like a phantom. Yet the effect of the stranger's shadow reached further than evidence could measure. It forced the family to reckon once more with the uncertainty that had defined their lives for 39 years. Every returned toy was a reminder that someone, somewhere, had preserved these items, objects a family would have assumed lost forever. Why keep them? Why hold on to them for decades, only to release them now? The questions were cruel in their simplicity, cruel in their refusal to yield answers. At night, the brother dreamed of a man sitting in a dark room, the sister's toys arranged neatly on a shelf, untouched but dusted, preserved as though they were sacred relics. In his dream, the man never spoke, only watched the toys in silence, as if they held the key to a story he could never bring himself to tell. When the brother woke, he wondered if this dream was not imagination but memory, some flicker of intuition too unsettling to dismiss. The mother, meanwhile, found herself haunted by another vision. She imagined her daughters older now, women in their 40s, carrying the weight of a past they could not explain. She wondered if perhaps the toys had been returned not by a captor but by one of the girls themselves, or by someone who had known them in their hidden life. The thought both comforted and tormented her, because it meant hope was alive, but also that the truth was even further beyond her reach. The stranger's shadow also transformed the way the town itself carried the memory of the case. The carnival grounds, once abandoned, became a place of uneasy pilgrimage. Teenagers told stories of the man, or woman, who had walked among them for decades, keeping secrets while smiling at checkout counters, while standing in church pews, while living just beyond the reach of suspicion. The returned toys became talismans in local lore, proof that the story had not ended, proof that the stranger's presence was not confined to the past but stretched into the present, perhaps even into the future. For the family, the epilogue was not closure but continuum. They placed the toys in a glass cabinet, not hidden but displayed, as though to remind themselves and others that the mystery was still alive. Visitors often paused before the cabinet, struck by the fragility of the objects, small, simple things that had carried an entire life's weight of grief. The mother dusted them every morning, her hands gentle, her eyes far away. The father stared at them sometimes as though they were puzzle pieces that refused to fit together. The brother avoided them when he could, but in their presence he also felt tethered to his sisters in a way words could not describe. And always, behind it all, loomed the stranger. A figure unseen, unknowable, carrying the weight of intention. Were they guilty, complicit, merciful, repentant? The truth remained a locked door. Perhaps one day it would swing open. Perhaps it never would. But the act of returning the toys had ensured that the stranger's shadow would live on, not only in the family's mind but in the town's folklore, in the whispers of neighbors, in the fascination of outsiders who stumbled upon the tale. The story ended where it began, not with answers, but with mystery. With a carnival that no longer existed except in memory. With three sisters frozen in time, their laughter echoing faintly in the night air. With toys that had traveled through decades, carrying silence heavier than words. And with a shadow, a stranger's shadow, that fell across everything, leaving the family, the community, and even those who only heard the tale to wonder whether true endings exist at all, or whether every story simply lingers, haunting, unfinished, in the spaces between what we know and what we can never prove. There are stories that live and die within the span of a single moment, fading like smoke once the telling is done. And then there are stories that never leave, stories that dig into the marrow of those who live them and echo across generations. The disappearance of the three sisters belonged to the second kind. Even 4 decades later, the silence of their absence was louder than any voice. For the family, life never returned to what it had been. Time had not healed, it had only reshaped the wound. The parents grew old with the mystery still lodged inside them, their faces lined with the exhaustion of unanswered prayers. The mother often sat by the window, holding the rabbit against her chest, staring out at the road as if waiting for a car that would never come. The father's hands, once strong and certain, shook as he held the plastic horse, still turning it over as if some hidden clue might one day reveal itself. Even in their old age, the smallest sounds, a knock on the door, a phone ringing, the laughter of children outside, could send their hearts racing, their minds leaping to the same impossible hope. Maybe this time it would be them. The brother carried the legacy differently. He had built a life, raised children, and yet the echo followed him everywhere. It lived in the way he tightened his grip on his daughter's hand whenever they walked through crowded places. It lived in the unease he felt at the sound of carnival music, the way the laughter of strangers felt tinged with menace. It lived in the way he spoke of his sisters, not as figures of tragedy, but as children who had once been whole, vibrant, alive. He told his own children about them, not the way the world remembered them as victims, but the way he remembered them as playmates, companions, sisters whose smiles once filled his world. In this way, he fought against the echo, trying to turn it into memory instead of loss. But echoes do not fade so easily. They bounce through the town as well, reverberating off old walls, embedded in cracked sidewalks. People still spoke of the sisters in hushed tones, weaving them into local folklore. New generations who had never seen the carnival, who had never known the family personally, still grew up with the story. They told it around campfires, warned each other in the dark. Beware of shadows at carnivals, beware of strangers who smile too easily. The sisters became both memory and myth, their absence a warning that echoed louder than any presence ever could. And what of the toys? Encased in glass, they became relics of a past that refused to die. Visitors came from other towns to see them, to stand in silence before objects so ordinary, yet made sacred by tragedy. Each person who saw them seemed to feel the same unsettling realization, that childhood can be stolen in an instant, that innocence is fragile, that life is made of moments far more delicate than we want to admit. The toys carried a presence greater than their size, an echo that whispered into the bones of all who looked upon them. The echo did not belong only to grief. It also carried tenderness, love, the unbreakable thread between the sisters and those who had lost them. In the silence of the house, the mother sometimes swore she could hear them still, the faint patter of feet in the hallway, the whisper of laughter behind closed doors, the gentle sound of the rabbit being dragged across the floor by tiny hands. Whether these were memories or something more, she could not say. But in them, she found both solace and torment. The echo of love was inseparable from the echo of absence. The stranger who had returned the toys became part of this echo too. Their presence, or rather, their absence, resonated like a question without answer. People speculated endlessly. Who were they, why now, what purpose had driven them? But as the years stretched onward, the stranger's identity mattered less than the shadow they had left behind. They were proof that the story was not finished, that secrets still lived among them. And so the echo grew louder, feeding on mystery, reverberating not only through memory but through imagination. Ultimately, the echo became the story's truest form. The sisters were gone, but not gone. The toys were returned, but not explained. The family was broken, but still bound by love. The community moved on, yet never forgot. And in every silence, in every carnival tune heard from a distance, in every child's laugh drifting across the summer night, the echo stirred again. Perhaps that is the cruelest truth of all, that some stories do not end. They linger in the air like unfinished music, repeating themselves, reshaping themselves, reaching for ears that were not even present when they began. The sisters' disappearance was one such story, a tale that had become part of the fabric of time itself. It lived in memory, in grief, in myth, in whispered warnings. It lived in the toys, silent witnesses of a past that refused to stay buried. And it lived in the shadow of a stranger, a figure who reminded everyone that the unknown is sometimes closer than we dare to believe. The echo that never fades is not only haunting, it is enduring. It ensures that the sisters are not erased, that they remain part of the world's memory, even if their fate remains hidden. In the end, it may not be closure, it may not be peace, but it is something even more powerful, remembrance. And remembrance, in its own way, is a form of defiance. The carnival lights are long extinguished, the music silenced, the grounds overtaken by weeds. Yet in the quiet spaces of the town, in the heartbeats of those who remember, in the dreams of those who still wonder, the sisters live on. Their story, incomplete and eternal, moves like a ghost through time. The echo remains, and perhaps, it always will.